Hi, everyone. Testing. We're just testing out a new system, so I'm hoping that this is helpful and this is working. Checking to make sure that my mic still works. All right. Well, thank you all, everyone who's joining today. For the town hall. My name is Arati Kreibich. I am a congressional candidate for NJ5 for New Jersey District 5, and today marks 27 days till our July 7th primary. It's a road we're hurtling towards, and we have an excellent chance of bringing about real change to this district, having a real Democrat who's representing us. So everybody who's out there and who is joining our town hall, welcome. I'm really happy for you to be here and for you to answer any questions that you might have. I want to start off a little bit before we get to the questions, talking about the kinds of things that have been happening. We had another town hall last week on racial justice and on Black Lives Matter. And since then, I have witnessed multiple marches, rallies, protests in so many different communities, big and small, across New Jersey and particularly across NJ5. And it has been moving every single time. It's been moving to go to these marches and protests, these solidarity events, and see Black, brown, white faces coming together with a single purpose: to try and dismantle the systemic racism on which our country has been built, to try and give voices to and center the Black experience, to talk about what it's like to have those difficult conversations afterwards, and to make sure that it goes beyond a trendy hashtag on Instagram or Facebook or social media. And really the key is to take it outside and making sure that we do everything we can. And that starts with, again, having those difficult conversations, self-reflecting, understanding our own role in upholding these systems wherever you are, and then making sure that we advocate for the kinds of policies that are going to be helpful. And while these particular protests and these particular marches and rallies and vigils have been due to the senseless killing and death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many more, we know that the systemic racism that exists is in all different areas. It's in education, it's in housing, it's in our neighborhoods, it's in the way we live. It infiltrates our society. And I think that as non-Black allies, as co-conspirators, what we all need to do is understand our own role. And what's heartening to me is seeing the young people lead, seeing folks who are younger talk about how they're not going to be complicit in the system and how they want that system changed. And I think this is a tipping point, and at least I hope this is a tipping point for monumental change that we need in our society. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all the protests and vigils and marches that we've been through, small and big. And I hope you continue to take this activism beyond the hashtag. So I think we have some questions. Let me see if we can have any questions that we have going on. So if you're joining us on Facebook Live, feel free to put them in the chat. If you're joining us on Zoom, put them in the chat here. If you're joining us any other way, we will get those questions. All right, I think I have a first question, Sheila in Norwood. Thank you, Sheila, for joining us. I think you might be on Zoom. Sheila, are you on Zoom? All right. So might not be on Zoom. Well, I'll answer your question. Sheila Norwood is asking, what issues are you passionate about? Thank you for that question, Sheila. There are a number of issues. I think that what I'm most passionate about, have been most passionate about, and what is so important now is to make sure that we are talking about collective and decisive action on the climate crisis. The climate crisis is an existential crisis. It underpins, its effects really underpin all the policies that we're talking about. It intersects with the pandemic. You know, this pandemic is a public health crisis that could have been prepared for by us for a long time, before Trump's sort of muzzling of scientists and the kinds of things that have happened because of ignoring science. And I think there's a lesson there. We've seen so many people die unnecessarily, be at risk unnecessarily. The economy in free fall, a large part of it has been rather unnecessary. And that's because we haven't been listening to scientists. And that's because we have a president who instead has been ignoring and muzzling scientists. And if you look at that, the pandemic has been this relatively short-term cataclysmic event. The climate change has been happening for decades. We've known about it. The scientists have been crying alarm bells about it as recently as 6 months ago, as recently as 2 years ago, where we were told we had less than 12 years to really course correct as much as we possibly can. And we've been ignoring it. We've been ignoring it by not actually putting policies in place that are going to decisively mitigate the climate crisis that we have coming down the pike. And I think that we need to make sure that our attention is turned towards that. We need to make sure that we elect leaders who not only understand that, who are going to advocate for policies, who are going to implement policies that will make sure that we're mitigating the worst effects of climate change. Look, it's here. There's not much we can do about it in terms of preventing the climate crisis, but there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we can do to mitigate the worst effects. The only thing that's not going to work is sticking our heads in the sand. The only thing that's not going to work are the kinds of things that are happening right now with COVID-19 bailouts given to fossil fuel companies, with Trump rolling back the EPA regulations, and our elected leaders and our representative NJ5 really doing nothing and not speaking out about it and doing nothing to reverse or to staunch that damage. So I think this is something that we need to keep our eye on, and not just that, we need to make sure that we have leaders who have this front and center. Great. We have another question, I think, from Bruce. Bruce, are you on Zoom as well?
Can you hear me?
Oh, I see that you are. Bruce, would you like to ask your question? Well, I can't hear you if you're asking your question, but I will read it out loud, and thank you for asking it. The question is, what are the policy differences between you and the incumbent? So thank you very much for asking that question. There are multiple policy differences between the incumbent and me. And it all starts with who we choose to represent. One of the most important things to me in government, in being an elected leader, is making sure I'm representing the people and not corporate donors. My opponent has received donations, millions and millions of dollars from Wall Street, from the real estate sector, from corporate donors, there's a straight line between that and the kinds of votes that he has had. I believe in representing the people. And I believe that Citizens United was one of the worst things that has happened to our American politics. So I'm not taking corporate PAC money. I'm not taking fossil fuel money, because I believe that our elected officials should have as little influence from corporations as possible, and that we need to take the undue influence of corporate money out of politics. We need to move to amend Citizens United. And I think that's a key difference, because that tells you where and why I'm fighting for the kinds of things that I'm fighting for. Beyond that, I believe, and I know, as do all of my constituents in NJ5, that our healthcare system is broken. And I know that what we need are big structural changes. And that includes fighting for and advocating for a single payer healthcare system. We've seen the effects, right? We've seen that the effects of COVID-19, the pandemic crisis, have been so much worse because of a lack of healthcare, partially because of the lack of healthcare. And I think that that's absolutely one of the most important things that we should be fighting for. Again, the climate crisis, my opponent doesn't seem to hold that as a priority. The Green New Deal, he says, is not going anywhere. He says that about Medicare for All as well. And I believe the opposite. I think that we have an opportunity now with this crisis, as the economy is going down, to jumpstart the economy with a Green New Deal framework, so that we can create green jobs, we can expand the green economy, and that we're able to have a more sustainable and resilient future, as we absolutely need to. This is the seismic shift that we need to have made, and I think this is an opportunity at which we can do that. So, and I think the other big difference is really the kinds of perspectives we bring to the table, right? I'm a scientist. I've been a scientist my entire life. I approach policy in a data-driven, science-led way, and I approach them with the perspective of somebody who hasn't always been heard, who hasn't always felt like they had a seat at the table. And I think it's really important for us as elected officials, for our folks in Congress, to reflect these lived experiences that our constituents have. And I'm not politics as usual. I'm not the status quo. I'm here to make a real change happen. And I think that's why NJ5 will choose me as a real Democrat on July 7th. And I think that's how we're going to keep the seat blue, not just in November in 2020, but in 2022 and 2024 and beyond. So thank you for that. Okay. I think we have a question from Zaina. Are you on? Rosanna?
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, thank you for asking a question.
Hi. So I just had a question. So the House Democrats have offered legislation in Congress that bans no-knock warrants and makes chokeholds a civil rights violation, and it makes it easier to prosecute police officers who use excessive force. But most Republicans don't seem to be on board.
So I don't know if we're having technical difficulties, but I cannot hear you.
Oh.
Hang on one second. We are having a little bit of technical difficulties here. If you can wait 1 second. I apologize.
Sure.
Okay, let's try that again.
All right.
All right.
Hi.
Can you share your question again?
Sure. So House Democrats have offered legislation in Congress that ban no-knock warrants and make chokeholds a civil rights violation, and it makes it easier to prosecute police officers who use excessive force. But most Republicans don't seem to be on board with this, especially. So how do you plan to pass civil rights legislation with Republicans who are constantly opposing them?
Well, thank you for your question. It sounds like the technical difficulty, unfortunately, is on my end, which means that for some reason I was not hearing you speak, but I have your question here, which is that House Democrats have offered legislation in Congress that bans no-knock warrants, makes chokeholds and a civil rights violation, and makes it easier to prosecute police who use excessive force. Most Republicans don't seem to be on board with this. How do you plan to pass civil rights legislation with the Republicans constantly opposing it? I think that was your question. I hope that was your question. Great. I think it's a really important point that you're bringing up, right? So we absolutely need this legislation in Congress. We absolutely need. I'm fully supportive of this legislation, which is really landmark in a lot of ways, right? We are making sure that we're taking this moment that we're talking about and really trying to do our best to start to reform the system, making sure that we are taking a look, reviewing the kinds of policies that are leading to some of the worst things that we're seeing and that we have been seeing. I think that's absolutely important. I think that's obviously a good first step that we need to do. And part of your question is, well, how do we get other people on board, particularly Republicans on board? I think there are two parts to this. One is what I've witnessed over the last couple of weeks, particularly with the BLM protests, are that more and more people who didn't understand or didn't quite see it as much as they should have before are coming on board. They're having these conversations, understanding a little bit more about what it's like to be a Black person in America. And of course, that the rest of us who are non-Black will never quite understand the full extent of it. But witnessing and being able to empathize and to be able to realize quite how bad things are and how bad they see, I think is a shift away from where we have been before. And folks are having these difficult conversations. So I think part of it is that we need that momentum coming from the grassroots to go out there and tell our congresspeople, tell our elected leaders. And it starts on the local level and making sure that you are having these conversations in your community and talking and demanding better from our police force, demanding better from our educational system, demanding better from our housing situation all across the board. And I think that creates a demand and that creates a social consciousness that reaches people across the aisle as well. And I am really optimistic that can happen in a very small amount of time. You know, there was a poll that they were talking about in, I think, North Jersey today, in an article in North Jersey that really talked about this political divide. And while people were talking about whether or not, you know, protests were violent or not, and folks seem to be divided on that on party lines, really, when we talked about police brutality and when the questions were about humanity, there were more people who agreed with each other than not. And I think it's going back to that core and reaching out to those Republican lawmakers and reaching out to folks across the board and demanding better, just as constituents and as American people. And I think that's how we're going to make change happen, starting at the grassroots level, asking our elected leaders to do better, and then making sure that we reach across the aisle. And it's not going to happen if Democrats keep compromising. It's not going to happen if we have elected leaders who keep saying, oh, well, you know, people are never going to agree, so we shouldn't even push. We have a majority in the House. We have a great chance of getting more seats in the Senate in November. And if we keep pushing, and if we keep talking about how, as a party, Democrats are there for humanity, for the policies the people want, I think we have a lot of power, and we keep demanding better, and this is how we bring everyone else to the table. So, great. Great. I think, do we have any other question? All right, so we have a question from Amari. And the question from Amari is, how can we demilitarize U.S. police forces? Thank you so much for that question. Look, particularly when we talk about the military, I think we already spend too much. So before we even start talking about the police forces, let's talk about the military. Let's talk about the fact that we have 56% of our budget discretionary spending is military. That's entirely too much. We need to start reappropriating that money and investing in the social safety net. We need to start making sure that what we're doing is taking care of the people, making sure that we put that money towards mental health care, making sure that we put that money towards helping with all the social safety things that we need to. And I think it's similar with demilitarizing the police. I think that what we need to do at every level, again, from the local level to the state level to the federal level, is make a concerted effort and have leaders in there who are going to make a concerted effort to take those resources out of military spending, out of arms and armor, and making sure that we are investing in social programs, right? So a lot of what we see, particularly in NJ5, has to do with poverty, has to do with addiction, has to do with really what we call social work in some ways. And it's a really important work, has to do with mental health care. When we actually solidify, support, reinforce those services, the criminalization aspect of it, the using police forces to regulate using guns, that goes away. And I think that what we need is more of an emphasis on making sure when we're getting out there that we are supporting all of these other services and taking money away in some way or reinvesting our funds into making sure that what we're managing to do is really support the people, right? And I think that that can be a process that starts with making sure we have de-escalation training, making sure that we do the reforms that we were talking about, like banning chokeholds, like making sure that we have adequate reporting, and making sure we have transparency and accountability, and then moving on to making sure that we as a community are talking about what we do to help the rest of the folk in our community. And I think those are the ways that we can move forward with demilitarizing the police, so reducing those resources and also strengthening the social safety net at the same time. Great. I think we have room for a few more questions. All right, so we have a question from Sheryl Tramontano, who's asking, do you think we can prevent further climate change without rethinking what we eat? Absolutely, knowing where our food comes from, making sure that we are as local as possible, making sure that we are consuming less of what is harmful for our planet is a big part of what we need to make sure on an individual basis, and making sure that we're mitigating the effects of climate change. That's been something that we've seen over and over again. So I agree completely. I think that on the federal level, on the state level, I think we can always invest in making sure that we are saving smaller farms, that we are not investing even more and not bailing out factory farms, that we're making sure that we preserve the local farms as much as possible. I know that this is a concern in NJ5, especially in the western part of the state. And I think absolutely we need to support those farmers as much as possible, so that we are able to have food sources that are close to us, and we're able to use that to mitigate the effects of climate change. So appreciate that question. Thank you so much. All right, we have another question. This is from Lisa. And Lisa is asking, what can you do about infrastructure in the tri-state area for commuters? Lisa, thank you so much for that question. Especially when we're talking about climate change and we're talking about some of the things that we are most vulnerable to in NJ5, our infrastructure is really vulnerable. We need to make sure that we are truly resilient to the effects of climate change. Those of us who are here during Sandy know exactly what happened with the breakdown of infrastructure during Sandy. Those are not storms that are just 100-year storms anymore. Those are storms that are happening more and more often. So we need to invest in infrastructure. We need to make sure that we can double down, advocate, and get the kinds of funding that we need to be truly resilient in NJ5. We also need to rethink as people how we commute and what we do. Especially with the pandemic, a lot of folks have really rethought work, rethought whether or not they need to use the cars as much, and move towards public transportation. And I think that is key to moving forward to mitigate the effects of climate change, to make us more resilient. So clearly we need more investment in public transportation, and we need to make sure that we're as resilient as possible with the interstate system. So. Okay. All right, and then we have another question from Amari. Will Medicare for All include reproductive, dental, and mental care? Thank you for that question, Amari. Absolutely, Medicare for All, the way we envision it, the way it needs to be, right? It can't be rationing of care. It's in fact the absolute opposite. So it does include dental care. It absolutely needs to include reproductive care and mental health care. Mental health care in particular is one of the most underfunded healthcare initiatives that we have. And we can see the effects of that, and we're going to be unfortunately seeing the effects of that after COVID-19, particularly with our essential workers, particularly with our frontline healthcare workers. And we need to also be able to take care of those who are taking care of us. Investing in mental health care is something that we should have done multiple years ago. We see the effects of not investing in it now, and absolutely there is no way that we can have a single payer system that doesn't include them. So, thank you. We have another question by Amy Dalal. And the question is, will voting be only by mail, or will there be in-person voting as well? So question, I'm assuming, is for the primary for July 7th. So right now, for those of you who have gotten your vote by mail ballots, keep an eye out for them in your mail. I just received mine yesterday. This election for July 7th is going to be primarily vote by mail. So it's recommended that you bubble that in, signed, seal it, and have it put in the mail the day of or before July 7th. It's going to be primarily vote by mail. However, at least one polling location in every municipality will be open for those who need to go in person for a variety of reasons, including accessibility issues. So we will have at least one polling place that's open in every municipality in New Jersey on July 7th, so you can still vote like that if you need to. But it is really recommended that, if at all possible, we vote by mail, and we vote and make sure that it's postmarked by July 7th. They will still accept ballots up to a week later, but they need to be postmarked by July 7th. So please, everybody, look out for that. Bubble in Arati Kreibich, Real Democrat, Real Change. You will have to go over to column 3 if you're in Bergen County. Right? All right. I don't know if there are any other questions in chat. All right. So we have a question. As well, and there are two questions that were related, and I think I spoke to them a little bit before. And the two questions are, what do you think about the movement to defund police? And the second question is, what policies do you support to tackle institutional racism in American policing? So, a couple of things. When people talk about what we need to do to reform and move away from the current concept of policing, folks have used the phrase defund police. And for the large part, I like to use the phrase reimagine policing, right? And reimagine the kinds of things that we could be doing. And I think that's really important, right? So the origins of our police force are as slave patrols, based on a really very racist system. So we've come from there, and the police are not a sign of safety, are not a sign of security for Black people in America today. I think we need to reimagine what that is like, what we do with policing. That doesn't mean that nobody's going to be secure. I think that obviously we need to have much more of a change from the concept of policing the way we have it right now and converting it to, again, making sure that we have stronger social safety nets, making sure that our idea of justice includes transformative justice, includes justice that is not based on systems of racism. I think that this is where we are at a point where we can start to have those conversations about what that looks like in our communities and what that can look like nationwide. But absolutely, it has to start with policies and reforms that can already start to take place, and then build upon that and build upon those conversations to how we shift away from the current model, and hopefully in as little time as possible. Because Black people are dying every day. This is an emergency. What we all need to do is come together, as we have been, understand that this is an emergency, and understand that we all need to have these conversations now and change those policies now. And so if we can do whatever we can to staunch that flow, staunch that blood, by making sure that we're banning particular horrible ways of restraining folks, making sure that we are adding transparency and accountability, making sure that we are reimagining the way we fund our police, I think all of those things are necessary now. And then we build upon them with those conversations that will make sure that we start to tackle that institutional racism, making sure that we start to tackle the profiling that occurs, and making sure that we start to institute policies and really change the way policing looks in our small towns, in our big cities, so that we don't have people in America who are afraid of the police just because of the color of their skin. I think we have another question talking about job creation post-COVID and what can Congress do. So recently we got jobs numbers, and we still have another million people on unemployment, although it's starting to look like there are a lot more people who are going back to work. But it's pretty clear that a lot of the jobs that have been lost are not coming back. So the question is, what kind of investment can we make? What we've learned from the COVID stimulus packages is that right now, the Congress that we have, while it's while it's trying to help people, seems to bail out corporations way more than helping people and helping regular people. So I think what we need to do is a shift to making sure that when we're talking about the economic stimulus as we're getting out of it, when we're talking about creating jobs, that we're concentrating on people and not bailing out corporations, particularly corporations with reserves of billions of dollars. So to me, I think we need to move towards that Green New Deal framework. I think that we need to concentrate on creating jobs that are sustainable, that are green jobs. I think we need to talk about a federal jobs guarantee. I think with the recession that is looming, that started in February, and that we're barreling towards, with the economic decline that we can see, with the epidemic of evictions that is on the horizon, with the projected rise in almost 45% in homelessness that we're hearing, with the kind of food insecurity that we already have that is projected to get worse. These are some of the only things that I can think of. Some of the most sane things that we can think of, which is investing in a federal jobs guarantee, making sure that we're continuing those direct cash payments as the crisis still continues, and then making sure that for the long term that we are using that Green New Deal framework to create jobs that are green. So a question on immigration, which is, how do you support immigrants and Central American refugees? Immigration is a question that is very important to me, being an immigrant myself. I think particularly when we look at refugees, when you look at the kinds of things that are happening at the border, the family separations that are still happening, kids that are still in cages, particularly with the added effects of COVID-19, it is an untenable situation. What we need to do first and foremost is make sure that people are safe, and we need to have a moratorium absolutely on separating kids and families. We need to think broader when we talk about comprehensive immigration reform, and we need to think and make sure that we pass a pathway to citizenship for dreamers and more. We need to make sure that we are taking care of all of our immigrants and all of our refugees. Look, part of the reason we have refugees is because of climate change. It's because of the economic crisis that is happening in various different countries because of climate change, leading to gangs, leading to violence, leading to folks needing to flee their countries. People are not coming here because of nefarious reasons. They're coming here because they are fearing for their lives and their livelihoods. And it's our responsibility as human beings to make sure that we take care of them. So first and foremost, take care of the people, and then talk about this reform in a larger way. Part of that, what we also need to do is, and this is some of what we talked about, is with the pandemic, knowing that immigrants in our society today are not getting as many resources from the COVID-19 stimulus bill, are not being taken care of as much as they need to. And this is part of what we need to make sure that we're doing in all of our policies moving forward. And I think this is really key and crucial to both our humanity, but also to our society, because these are folks who are part of our society, an integral, essential part of our society, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of them. Okay. Okay. I think we have another question, which is, Teterboro Airport is the biggest polluter in Bergen County. What are you going to do about that? Jim, thank you for that question, and thank you for watching on Facebook for that question. So I think part of what we need to do is make sure that we're enforcing the rules and regulations that are already in place. That is the bare minimum, right? So we have EPA regulations that are already in place. We have multiple different kinds of regulations that are already in place. And unfortunately, due to the lack of funding, due to the White House and the Trump administration rolling back some of those regulations, polluters are able to get away with a lot more than they ever can. And I think that is a really important point that we need to move forward with. And I think this is something that I would be fighting for as an elected official from here. Obviously, pollution is in multiple different ways, and one of it is also noise pollution. And I know that's been a concern for folks in surrounding areas. I know that's a conversation with the FAA, among other places. And I think what we also need to do is make sure that we are having those conversations, and that we make sure that folks in those communities are heard. And this has been something that I know has been an issue for a long time. And when I'm elected, I will try and do my best to make sure that we can start to move towards a resolution, if there is one at all possible. That's great. I don't know if we have any other questions, so we're going to keep looking. So thank you all for joining, and thank you for this array of questions. I think those are all really important and speak to all the different kinds of topics that are important to all of us in NJ5 and North Jersey. So I'm not sure that we have any more questions right now. So I wanted to really thank you all for being part of this town hall. It is imperative, it is critical that we have elected leaders who hold regular town halls like this that are able to reach the people where they are, which is exactly what we're trying to do. It is not possible now yet to have town halls that are face-to-face, but even if it were, I think it's really important to have these town halls where we're reaching people wherever they are, with as much transparency and accountability as possible. And this is one of the things that I know is important, being an elected official, where every 2 weeks as a council member, I am in a public meeting where anybody can come and ask me those questions. I think that's the crux of what our government is about, right? Being able to ask those difficult or easy questions of our elected leaders, hearing the answers, and having that answer be the same for everybody who is there. Whether you're from one party or another, whether you're from one part of the district or another. So I aim to continue these town halls throughout the campaign, but absolutely once I'm elected as well. And I aim for them to be as transparent and as accountable as possible. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for all the questions that were thought-provoking and really showed the array of things that we're all concerned about. So I appreciate you being here, and please drop any emails, any other questions or comments you might have at arthiforcongress.com. You can email info@arthiforcongress.com. Remember, the primary election date is July 7th. Vote by mail ballots are in your mailboxes right now or coming very soon. Remember that you have to go across a couple of columns. If you're in Bergen County, you'll be in column 3 to vote for me, Arati Kreibich, real Democrat, real change. Thank you so much. With your help, we're going to have real change that we're bringing to this district. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.